So in the previous Where to Start Scripted Examples video, I gave you some examples about querying layer service. And in this video, I'm going to give you some examples about executing modo commands. So I have a script here, and when I run this, first I'm going to show you the item list. I have a few empty mesh layers. Now when I run this script, then you see in the viewport over here, and I can't resize it, I have added a cube on every mesh layer, as you can see in the item list. I'm going to component mode to now in vertices. You can see on every layer I have a cube, and this is done through this code, which I'm going to discuss in the rest of this video. As a start, I want to point out that in the previous video, when I used the query, that it is actually a command. So when you go to your command history, and in the commands tab you do a filter search on query, then you have the result, and over here you have its usage. So you have query, which is the command, and then it takes 1, 2, 3, 4 arguments, and the first 3 are required arguments, the last one is an optional argument. So the notation is query, then you need to provide a string for the service, so that is in this case layer service. Then you need to provide an attribute which is a string, so one of the attributes of layer service is layers, like that. And then you have to provide a value. This is a read-only value because there is a hashtag in front of it, and because it's being followed by an asterisk, that means that it can have that its data type can be variable, and this is actually the question mark. And in the documentation it says, and I've added it as a note here, so query is a command, and the read-only value argument, so this hashtag value colon asterisk, that argument provides the specific attribute information and should be set as a question mark to query the value. And then the last parameter, which is an optional parameter, select string. So in this case I've chose all, so all mesh layers, and as I've demonstrated, all mesh layers now have a cube, and this is of course not very good code. It would be better to actually write code that, for instance, would only create a cube on selected layers, and that is what I'm going to discuss next. So I showed you that when I run this code, that on every mesh layer a cube will be added, and the code that actually takes care of that is this code over here. So again, it's an alex.eval method of the alex module, and this time as a string argument tool.set space prim.cube space on, and then tool.reset as a string, then tool.apply as a string, and tool.set primcube off. So how do you get to this code? Well, Python scripting in Modo is like a macro, but then with flow control. What does that mean? Well, first, how do you get to this code? Well, you could actually record a macro for doing so. So for instance, if I go to my model tab, and I'm going to create a cube, but while recording a macro. So first I'm going to select, for instance, this layer and go to, for instance, vertex mode, and in the right lower corner you have your macro controls, If you don't see them, you probably have a red circle down there. You can click it and then you get the other options. And the red one is to start recording. So when I click that button, now I am recording a macro. And then I'm going to the left upper corner. First I'm going to make the cube tool active. And then I'm going to control click and drag in the viewport to create a cube. Now I'm going to press Ctrl D to reset this tool. So now I have my position at 0 and my size is 1 meter. And now I'm going to click the cube primitive icon again to drop my tool. And I'm going to stop recording my macro. So by clicking now on the square, orange square over here, and now on the gear icon, I can click on it and say save to file, and I get a pop-up window where I can choose to, and I'm going to, for instance, and the name doesn't really matter, so in my scripting tab, and save, successfully saved. Okay, so now when I go to that drive, I have my untitled LXN, that is my macro. When I double click it, this is the code that has been recorded by the macro. So the first line is tool.set primcube on. And then you saw that I did a control click and drag, but I also did a tool.reset. So these are the values that had been entered for the placement of the cube and the size. You don't actually need it. If you do a tool.reset, it will be a unit cube, so I can delete that part. And then what you have left is tool.set prim.cube on, tool.reset, tool.apply, and then tool.set prim.cube off. So with this code, you can actually create a unit cube. And when I do a Control C and go now to my script in modo, so first I'm going to press or the delete key to delete that geometry, go back to item mode, and now go back to my scripting tab. Okay, over here in my code, when I paste it, you see that is actually completely the same code that I have here. So tool.set prim.cube on, tool.set prim.cube on, tool.reset, tool.reset, and so on. Tool.apply, tool.apply, tool.set primcube off, tool.set primcube off. So when you record a macro, you actually record the modo commands, and all you have to do now is pass them as a string because they are between quotes. So this is a string. So you pass the command as a string to the eval function of the LX module. And when this code gets executed, then on the selected layers, there will be a cube that has been added. And you see the main code I have here is a function called mf underscore create cube on mesh layers. So this is that function. And what is the code in that function? So I'm declaring a variable all layers, and I'm assigning the results of the lx.eval n this time. And the command that I'm passing as a string is query layer service. Layers, question mark, all. So I'm getting a tuple of all mesh layers. And as a note, I have added note lx.eval n, because with lx.eval you cannot perform the following loop, because lx.eval returns 1 if there is only one mesh layer. So if I were to go to my item list and I don't see anything in my item list, it has to be refreshed. So if I were to delete these layers, so now I only have one mesh layer, when I run my code I get an error. Oh yeah, I had some text selected, so I'm going to clear all and clear my selection in here, run the code, and actually a cube has been provided. Let me pause a moment. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Of course, I am executing the lx.eval_n function. So I have deleted my mesh layer, so I have only one mesh layer. If I delete the n now in my code, that was what I had to do. So now I'm going to execute the lx.eval function with the query layer service layers $all, and now I will get an error. You see, type error, int object is not iterable. So the lx.eval function returns 1 if I have only one mesh layer. It does not return a list, and so I'm not going to be able to iterate through it. So I need to have a collection even if I have only one mesh layer. So again, the eval n, and now when I run this code with only one mesh layer, you see a cube is being added. And that's it for this section. On to the next one. So in the previous part I had code that would put a unit cube on all layers. Now that is not very practical. If you have dozens or hundreds of mesh layers, you do not want to put a cube on all of them. Most of the time you will not want to do that. So I have modified the code. So in this code, the query layer service layers does return a collection of foreground layers. Now, at the moment in the item list, I have not a mesh layer that is selected. So when I click here, because I do need to deselect my text here, click in the viewport, so I make sure that I have nothing selected, then you would expect not to have a cube being created. So let me test and run the code. And on mesh 8, there actually has been a cube that has been created. Now, why is this? Well, modo internally has a kind of special selectors. And what does that mean? I'm first going to press Ctrl Z to undo everything and show you something else. So let me select in the item list mesh 6 and mesh 3 and mesh, for instance. And now when I click in the viewport to deselect all the items, and as you can see, I'm in item mode. So now those mesh layers have been deselected. When I run my code, now you see, even if you don't have any layers selected in the item list, modo remembers your last selection. And because you do not have anything selected, it will use that selection as an internal selector, if you will. And as you can see in the event log, I've done an output, so it's 6, 3, and 1, and you see on mesh 6, mesh 3, and mesh, a cube has been created. So I'm going to press Ctrl Z to undo, and now for instance I want a cube on mesh 7 and mesh 2. Now when I run the code, so now I have actually selected items mesh layers in the item list, run the code, and now only on those two I have created a cube. When I, for instance, select mesh 2, and that is the last that is being selected, that's because of the code. When I go to component mode by pressing Shift spacebar, Ctrl X to cut, then go to mesh 7 and again Ctrl X to cut. Now mesh 7 was the last one that has been selected, so I have not dropped my item selection by clicking in the viewport, but by control clicking or by selecting one by one in the item list. Now when I go to the item mode, for instance, and click in the viewport, again everything has been deselected, but this time my last selection was mesh 7, because I did a selection one by one and not a deselection one by one and not a deselection of all the ones that were selected at once. And now when I press it will be on mesh, only on mesh 7, as you can see. So internally, modo remembers the last selection of mesh layers you had. And if you do not specify in your code on which layer you want the code to execute, then modo will revert to the last internal selection. So Control Z to undo. So, and actually that is the index S that you are passing. So when you do your query layer service layer, or sorry, I have to go to this one. So query layer service layers question mark foreground, it returns a tuple. But since I don't have any selections now, modo does not know what your foreground selections actually are, and it will revert to the last one selected. So that is a very important thing to remember. And for the rest of the code, I have my Alex out, which is with output to the event log for all layers each time. And then I do a for loop. So for and the variable vary in all layers. So all layers is my collection, and it's each time it is a collection because I am using the eval1. So even if there is only one, like here, it will be between parentheses because with eval1 you do get a collection or none. So if there is no internal selection, you will get back none. But since there always, and let me test to Control W, don't save. So you see, if you have a new scene, then mesh is selected. So internally now mesh is also selected. So when I click in the viewport and run my code, and I get an error, let me inspect for a moment. Okay, sorry, I'm back again. I have the N selected in my Python editor, so always make sure to deselect it. You will encounter that often. So I had with my default scene a mesh layer that had been selected, and even when I deselect it, it will be still selected internally. So when I run the code, you see mesh will get my cube. Control Z. So that is a very important notion to know about working with querying the layer service or the scene service and so on. You have to make sure, and you will have to write a lot of code and do a lot of tests to really know how you should write your code to make sure that you anticipate all possible scenarios, because right here I have one mesh layer and you might write code that works for that one mesh layer, and then suddenly you open another scene and you have multiple mesh layers and you run your script and you get an error and you think, wow, what has happened? It did work. Well, it did work for a scene with one mesh layer, but you did not test it maybe with a scene with multiple mesh layers. So very important. So to continue with the code, so for my variable in all layers, the list that has been returned, and it's all foreground layers this time, I declare another variable lname, and that gets assigned the result of alex.eval and query layer service layer.name question mark %s and the index, which is the variable. And then I do an alex eval to, and this time it's not a query, it's a command to be executed, select.item %s lname. So I specifically tell modo, after you have queried the name, now select that mesh item layer, and that is being done with the modo command select.item, and you can provide the name to do that selection. And then I do an alex.eval query layer service layers question mark current, and I'm not going to go further into this code because this is actually not really about layer service, the video. It's about an example of how you can start out in modo. That was the point of this video. So where do you start? That's in the previous section I showed you that you can query values with query, but you can also execute commands. And so when you query, the question mark is important. The query is always with the question mark. And you can also execute modo commands with the eval methods, the eval1 and the evaln, by passing the commands as a string into those functions. And then lastly, in that function, I do my create unit cube at origin, which is that function. So clicking in the viewport, pressing the N key a couple of times to have my mesh layers, a couple of mesh layers. So when I select, for instance, mesh 7, 4, and 3, run my code, and I have again a selection over here, so deselect it, run my code. So you see now on mesh 7, 4, and 3 are now not grayed out anymore. They all have a unit cube, and you see in my event log 743. And the last thing that I wanted to say about this is that also the order in which you select is important. You see, this time I selected 743. So let me undo. Click in the viewport to deselect everything. Now I will select 3 first, then 4, and then 7, and run my code again. And now you see the output in the event log is 347. So this might also be important in your code. So there is a lot to take into consideration when you start out scripting in Modo. In these videos, I'm not going to go further into actual scripting, but these serve as an intro, so for where you can start. And as explained in my previous where to start video, you also have other services, not only the layer service, so we have scene service and command service and so on. So you will have to check out the docs about them. And also there is, in the meantime, since a couple of years, a new API, which is a more Pythonic wrapper. So with that new API, you do not need to pass modo commands as strings into the ls eval methods, but you have a more Pythonic way of writing code. But you will find it useful to know about the old command system, because more than likely you will need to apply the old command system, since the new API does not replace everything at this time, as far as I know. And this concludes this section. And as a last topic, I wanted to point you to a post on the Foundries forum. So when I go to the Foundries forum, you have a topic, learning Python for Modo scripting, the best way. And in that post, there is a lot of useful information. Some people do post links to posts on the forum, and there is a very interesting part by Cristobal Vila, links with tips for Python and Modo. Very interesting. So how do you get to that topic? Well, if you do a search, so I'm going to open a search, and when you do a search for Python and then click limit to topics started by this profile and enter Chris B, like that. So Python, then the profile Chris B, and check this part and submit, then you should get the first result, learning Python for Modo scripting best way. And in that post you have very useful links to posts on the forum, and this link is very useful. So when you click it, you have links with tips for Python and Modo compiled by Cristobal Vila, and it's last been updated on September 10, 2015, so it's very up to date. And I'm going to scroll through that list, and you can see there is a lot of information here. So I haven't checked it out all yet. So there is very, very useful So again, it's a post started by Chris B, and as shown, if you do a search for Python and then search for profile Chris B and check the check mark like I've shown you, then you will find this post with very useful information, especially the one by Cristobal Vila. That's something that I wanted to add. So I hope you found it useful. Bye for now.